Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma by Peter Levine with AnnFrederick. Levine's work uncovers the real cause of traumatic stress disorder, thus making it obvious why the usual psychiatric and psychological methods of treating trauma are limited. His approach allows us to access the problem at its physiological roots through the felt sense. The wisdom of the felt sense gives us at once the instinct of an animal and the intelligence of a human being. Lacking either, we are doomed to repeat our hostilities until none of us remain. I am endlessly fascinated with the subject of trauma, with its intricate relationship to the physical and natural sciences, to philosophy, to mythology, and to the arts. Working with trauma has helped me to comprehend the meaning of suffering, both necessary and unnecessary. Most of all, it has helped me to fathom the enigma of the human spirit. I am grateful for this unique opportunity to learn and for the privilege of witnessing and participating in the profound metamorphosis that the healing of trauma can bring about. Trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence. Not only can trauma be healed, but with appropriate guidance and support, it can be transformative. Trauma has the potential to be one of the most significant forces for psychological, social, and spiritual awakening and evolution. Trauma is traditionally regarded as a psychological and medical disorder of the mind. The practice of modern medicine and psychology, while giving lip service to a connection between mind and body, greatly underestimates the deep relationship that they have in the healing of trauma. The welded unity of body and mind that throughout time has formed the philosophical and practical underpinnings of most of the world's traditional healing systems is sadly lacking in our modern understanding and treatment of trauma. For thousands of years, Oriental and shamanic healers have recognized not only that the mind affects the body, as in psychosomatic medicine, but how every organ system of the body equally has a psychic representation in the fabric of the mind. Recent revolutionary developments in neuroscience and psychoneuroimmunology have established solid evidence of the intricate two-way communication between mind and body. In identifying complex neuropeptide messengers, researchers like Candice Pert have discovered many pathways by which mind and body mutually communicate. This leading-edge research echoes what ancient wisdom has always known, that each organ of the body, including the brain, speaks its own thoughts, feelings, and promptings, and listens to those of all the others. Most therapies address the mind through talk and the molecules of the mind with drugs. Both of these approaches can be of use. However, trauma is not, will not, and can never be fully healed until we also address the essential role played by the body. We must understand how the body is affected by trauma and its central position in healing its aftermath. Without this foundation, our attempts at mastering trauma will be limited and one-sided. Beyond the mechanistic, reductionistic view of life, there exists a sensing, feeling, knowing, living organism. This living body, a condition we share with all sentient beings, informs us of our innate capacity to heal from the effects of trauma. This book is about the gift of wisdom we receive as a result of learning to harness and transform the body's awesome, primordial, and intelligent energies. In overcoming the destructive force of trauma, our innate potential now lifts us to new heights of mastery and knowledge. Peter Levine. The body reacts profoundly in trauma. It tenses in readiness, braces in fear, and freezes and collapses in helpless terror. When the mind's protective reaction to overwhelm returns to normal, the body's response is also meant to normalize after the event. When this restorative process is thwarted, the effects of trauma become fixated and the person becomes traumatized. Psychology traditionally approaches trauma through its effects on the mind. This is at best only half the story, and a wholly inadequate one. Without the body and mind accessed together as a unit, we will not be able to deeply understand or heal trauma. I do not view post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) as pathology to be managed, suppressed, or adjusted to, but the result of a natural process gone awry. Healing trauma requires a direct experience of the living, feeling, knowing organism. The principles I'm going to share with you are the result of working with clients as well as following clues about the origins of trauma. The study has led me into the fields of physiology, neuroscience, animal behavior, mathematics, psychology, and philosophy, to name a few. In the beginning, my successes were the result of happenstance and blind luck. As I continued working with people, questioning what I learned, pushing what I knew further and further into the mystery of trauma, I was able to succeed predictably rather than by chance. Increasingly, I became convinced that the instinctual repertoire of the human organism includes a deep biological knowing which, given the opportunity to do so, can and will guide the process of healing trauma. Somatic experiencing is new and is not subject to rigorous scientific research at this time. What I have to support the validity of this approach are several hundred individual cases in which people report that the symptoms which once impaired their ability to live full and satisfied lives are gone or greatly diminished. At the moment of contact, or just before, the young impala falls to the ground, surrendering to its impending death. Yet it may be uninjured. The stone-still animal is not pretending to be dead. It has instinctively entered an altered state of consciousness shared by all mammals when death appears imminent. Many indigenous peoples view this phenomenon as a surrender of the spirit of the prey to the predator, which, in a manner of speaking, it is. Physiologists call this altered state the immobility or freezing response. It is one of the three primary responses available to reptiles and mammals when faced with an overwhelming threat. The other two, fight and flight, are much more familiar to most of us. Less is known about the immobility response. Most modern cultures tend to judge this instinctive surrender in the face of overwhelming threat as a weakness, tantamount to cowardice. However, underneath this judgment lies a deep human fear of immobility. We avoid it because it is a state very similar to death. This avoidance is understandable, but we pay dearly for it. The physiological evidence clearly shows that the ability to go into and come out of this natural response is the key to avoiding the debilitating effects of trauma. It is a gift to us from the wild. The key to healing traumatic symptoms in humans is in our physiology. When faced with what is perceived as inescapable or overwhelming threat, humans and animals both use the immobility response. The important thing to understand about this function is that it is involuntary. This simply means that the physiological mechanism governing this response resides in the primitive instinctual parts of our brains and nervous systems, and is not under our conscious control. That is why I feel that the study of wild animal behavior is essential to the understanding and healing of human trauma. The involuntary and instinctual portions of the human brain and nervous system are virtually identical to those of other mammals and even reptiles. Unlike wild animals, when threatened, we humans have never found it easy to resolve the dilemma of whether to fight or flee. This dilemma stems, at least in part, from the fact that our species has played the role of both predator and prey. Prehistoric peoples, though many were hunters, spent long hours each day huddled together in cold caves, with the certain knowledge that they could be snatched up at any moment and torn to shreds. Our chances for survival increased as we gathered in larger groups, discovered fire, and invented tools, many of which were weapons used for hunting and self-defense. However, the genetic memory of being easy prey has persisted in our brains and nervous systems, lacking both the swiftness of an impala and the lethal fangs and claws of a stalking cheetah. Our human brains often second-guess our ability to take life-preserving action. This uncertainty has made us particularly vulnerable to the powerful effects of trauma. It's about energy. Traumatic symptoms are not caused by the triggering event itself. They stem from the frozen residue of energy that has not been resolved and discharged. This residue remains trapped in the nervous system, where it can wreak havoc on our bodies and spirits. The long-term, alarming, debilitating, and often bizarre symptoms of PTSD develop when we cannot complete the process of moving in, through and out of the immobility or freezing state. However, we can thaw by initiating and encouraging our innate drive to return to a state of dynamic equilibrium. Embedded deep within the brain of every animal is the reptilian brain. It is the home of the instincts. The only way to consciously access our healing resources is through sensation and the felt sense. Sensation is the language of the reptilian brain. Biologically and physiologically, the reptilian brain is essential to all animals, including humans. It is encoded with the instinctual plans for the behaviors that ensure the survival of the species, self-preservation and reproduction. Involuntary changes that regulate the body's vital functions are controlled from this part of the brain. The reptilian brain is the template from which all higher life has evolved. While its function can be enhanced or seemingly overridden in higher animals, the behaviors that originate in the reptilian core of the brain are the key to unlocking the mystery of trauma. These behaviors are what allow us to experience ourselves as human animals. When the reptilian brain speaks, listen. It's not his fault, he said. Oh sure, Lex said. He practically ate us, and it's not his fault. He's a carnivore. He was just doing what he does. Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park. How and what can we learn from animals? In the natural world, the survival responses we've been discussing are normal, healthy, and to the animal's advantage. When animals experience life-threatening events, they quickly move beyond the initial shock, reaction, and recover. Their reactions are time-limited and do not become chronic. Observing this behavior can give us an understanding of our own instinctual ability to successfully overcome trauma. We can also learn more about not to interfere with our instincts. The experience of the felt sense gives us a backdrop for reconnecting with the animal in ourselves. Knowing feeling and sensing focuses our attention where healing can begin. Nature has not forgotten us. We have forgotten it. Attunement. The first track is the end of a string. At the far end, a being is moving, a mystery, dropping a hint about itself every so many feet, telling you more about itself until you can almost see it, even before you come to it. From The Tracker by Tom Brown, as told to William John Watkins. In today's world, most people lack the ability to stay present or tuned in to the nuances of their internal and external landscapes. However, this type of awareness remains key to the functioning of many native peoples. Consider the experience of a native tracker in the wild. In order to be tuned in to his environment, the tracker must stay completely attentive to his animal responses and felt sense. By doing so, he not only becomes more aware of his own reaction, but those of his prey. The tracker and the tracked become one. His safety depends on remaining present by employing the felt sense. In this way, his finely tuned senses can pick up the slightest sound or movement. Internally, he may be warned of danger by an intangible sense that something isn't quite right. Smells are rich, colors bright and vibrant. Everything is bursting with life. In this state of awareness, it is possible to find beauty in what otherwise might be perceived as mundane. A twig, a caterpillar, a drop of dew on a leaf. While the tracker is attuned to this flow, he feels a deep sense of well-being. He is ready to respond, alert yet relaxed. Optimally functioning orienting responses give the tracker confidence and a sense of security about his ability to successfully identify and meet any challenge he encounters. The behavior of an animal when it experiences and responds to novelty in its environment is called an orienting response. These instinctive responses are as primitive as the reptilian brain that organizes them. They allow an animal to respond fluidly to an ever-changing environment. All animals, including humans, possess these coordinated patterns of muscle movement and perceptual awareness. The behaviors of fighting, fleeing, and freezing are so primitive that they predate even the reptilian brain. These survival tools are found in all species, from spiders and cockroaches to primates and human beings. Universal and primitive defensive behaviors are called the fight or flight strategies. If the situation calls for aggression, the threatened creature will fight. If the threatened animal is likely to lose the fight, it will run if it can. These choices aren't thought out, they are instinctually orchestrated by the reptilian and limbic brains. When neither fight or flight will ensure the animal's safety, there is another line of defense: immobility, freezing, which is just as universal and basic to survival. For inexplicable reasons, this defense strategy is rarely given equal billing in texts on biology and psychology. Yet, it is an equally viable survival strategy in threatening situations. In many situations, it is the best choice. On the biological level, success doesn't mean winning, it means surviving, and it doesn't really matter how you get there. Nature places no value judgment about which is the superior strategy. If the coyote leaves the seemingly dead opossum alone, it will recover from its immobility and walk off unconcerned about whether it would have responded in a better way. Animals do not view freezing as a sign of inadequacy or weakness, nor should we. The purpose of running or fighting to escape danger is obvious. The efficacy of the immobility response is less apparent, yet it is equally important as a survival mechanism. Ultimately, only nature determines which instinctual response will enhance the overall likelihood of survival for a species. No animal, not even the human, has conscious control over whether or not it freezes in response to threat. When an animal perceives that it is trapped and can't escape by running or fighting, freezing offers several advantages. Animals as teachers. Animals in the wild provide us with a standard for health and vigor, as well as give us insight into the biological healing process. They offer us a precious glimpse of how we might function if our responses were purely instinctual. Animals are our teachers, exemplifying nature in balance. One of the difficulties in treating trauma has been the undue focus on the content of an event that has engendered trauma. Trauma sufferers tend to identify themselves as survivors rather than as animals with an instinctual power to heal. The animal's ability to rebound from threat can serve as a model for humans. It gives us a direction that may point the way to our own innate healing abilities. We must pay attention to our animal nature to find the instinctive strategies needed to release us from trauma's debilitating effects. When fight and flight responses are thwarted, the organism instinctively constricts as it moves toward the last option, the freezing response. As it constricts, the energy that would have been discharged by executing the fight or flight strategies is amplified and bound up in the nervous system. In this emotional and anxious state, the now frustrated fight response erupts into rage. The frustrated fight response gives way to helplessness. The individual who has moved into the stage characterized by rage or helplessness still has the potential to move abruptly back into the frantic flight response or a raging counterattack. If the organism is able to discharge the energy by feeling or defending itself and thus resolve the threat, trauma will not occur. Fear and immobility. The duration of the immobility response in animals is normally time-limited. They go in and they come out. The human immobility response does not easily resolve itself, because the supercharged energy locked in the nervous system is imprisoned by the emotions of fear and terror. The result is that a vicious cycle of fear and immobility takes over, preventing the response from completing naturally. When not allowed to complete, these responses form the symptoms of trauma, just as terror and rage figured in the onset of the freezing response. They will now contribute greatly to its maintenance, even though there is no longer any actual threat present. The neocortex easily overrides some of our gentler instinctual responses, such as those that guide the healing of trauma through the discharge of energy. If the discharge process is to serve its purpose, it must be initiated and driven by impulses from the reptilian brain. The neocortex must elaborate on instinctual information, not control it. The neocortex is not powerful enough to override the instinctual defense response to threat and danger, the fight, flee, or freeze responses. In this respect, we humans are still inextricably bound to our animal heritage. Animals, however, do not have a highly evolved neocortex to interfere with the natural return to normal functioning through some form of discharge. In humans, trauma occurs as a result of the initiation of an instinctual cycle that is not allowed to finish. When the neocortex overrides the instinctual responses that would initiate the completion of the cycle, we will be traumatized. It is universally true that the renegotiation of trauma is an inherently mythic, poetic, heroic journey. It is a journey that belongs to all of us because we are human animals, even those of us who have never set foot outside of a city. The process of resolving trauma can move us beyond our social and cultural confinements towards a greater sense of universality. Because every injury exists within life and life is constantly renewing itself. Within every injury is the seed of healing and renewal. At the moment our skin is cut, or punctured by a foreign object. A magnificent and precise series of biological events is orchestrated through evolutionary wisdom. The body has been designed to renew itself through continuous self-correction. These same principles also apply to the healing of psyche, spirit, and soul. Trauma is trauma, no matter what caused it. Trauma occurs when an event creates an unresolved impact on an organism. Resolution is accomplished through working with this unresolved impact through the felt sense. Reliving the event in itself may seem valuable, but too often it is not. Traumatic symptoms sometimes mimic or recreate the event that caused them. However, healing requires an ability to get in touch with the process of the traumatic response. During times of conflict or stress, most people experience symptoms such as increased heartbeat and breathing, agitation, difficulty in sleeping, tension, muscular jitteriness, racing thoughts, or perhaps an anxiety attack. Though not always indicative of traumatic symptoms, these signs are usually due to some form of hyperarousal. If hyperarousal, constriction, dissociation, and a sense of helplessness form the core of the traumatic reaction, then hyperarousal is the seed in that core. Generally, some traumatic symptoms are more likely to appear sooner than others. In the last chapter, we discussed the first symptoms to develop, the core of the traumatic reaction: hyperarousal, constriction, dissociation, including denial, feelings of helplessness. Other early symptoms that begin to show up at the same time or shortly after those above are hypervigilance, being on guard at all times, intrusive imagery or flashbacks, extreme sensitivity to light and sound, hyperactivity, exaggerated emotional and startle responses, nightmares and night terrors, abrupt mood swings, rage reactions or temper tantrums, shame, reduced ability to deal with stress, easily and frequently stressed out, difficulty sleeping. To help you get a feel for how trauma symptoms behave, symptoms that generally occur in this next stage of development include panic attacks, anxiety and phobias, mental blankness or spaciness, exaggerated startle response, extreme sensitivity to light and sound, hyperactivity, exaggerated emotional responses, nightmares and night terrors, avoidance behavior, avoiding certain circumstances, attraction to dangerous situations, frequent crying, abrupt mood swings, rage reactions or temper tantrums, shame, exaggerated or diminished sexual activity, amnesia and forgetfulness, inability to love, nurture or bond, with other individuals, fear of dying, going crazy, or having a shortened life, reduced ability to deal with stress, easily and frequently stressed out, difficulty with sleep. And symptoms that generally develop last include excessive shyness, muted or diminished emotional responses, inability to make commitments, chronic fatigue or very low physical energy, immune system problems, and certain endocrine problems such as thyroid dysfunction, psychosomatic illnesses, particularly headaches, neck and back problems, asthma, digestive, spastic colon, and severe premenstrual syndrome, depression, feelings of impending doom, feelings of detachment, alienation, and isolation, living dead, diminished interest in life, fear of dying, going crazy or having a shortened life, frequent crying, abrupt mood swings, rage, reactions or temper tantrums, shame, exaggerated or diminished sexual activity, amnesia and forgetfulness, feelings and behaviors of helplessness, inability to love, nurture or bond with other individuals, difficulty with sleep, reduced ability to deal with stress and to formulate plans.